Hello, my friend. Today I will tell you another long-forgotten legend. Close your eyes and let the magic transport you to Middle-earth. Our journey begins in the elder days, before the kingdoms of men rose to power, before the long wars and the final twilight of the elves. There was a city hidden among the mountains, untouched by war, unseen by the enemy. Gondolin, the White City. The fairest jewel of the Elven realms lay in the heart of a valley encircled by mighty peaks, where the winds whispered secrets only the stars could hear. Its towers gleamed with silver and pearl, its gates stood proud, hewed from stone older than memory, and its streets were paved with white marble, glistening under the light of the moon. The waterfalls of Amon Guth sang everlastingly, their voices mingling with the laughter of the elves, for they feared no shadow behind their unbreachable walls. But even the brightest flame may cast a shadow. Turan, king of Gondolin, stood upon the highest balcony of his palace, his gaze lost in the distance beyond the mountains. He had long ruled his people in peace, yet in the depths of his heart an unease stirred. The world beyond was changing. Word came from the few travelers that still wandered in secret. Morgoth, the Dark Lord, stirred in his fort of Angband. His power grew, his servants multiplied, and far beyond the Encircling Mountains, Middle-earth groaned under the weight of his shadow. And so the king turned to the wisdom of the valor, to the lords of the West who had blessed his people before their exile. He adorned himself in robes of sapphire and silver, the colors of the ocean, and ascended the highest tower of his citadel, where the wind blew free. There he spoke the name of Ulmo, the Lord of Waters. Far away, beyond land and time, Ulmo heard his call. The sea stirred and the rivers whispered his name, for he was the only Vala who still cared for the children of Iluvatar, the only one who did not turn away when the Noor defied the will of the West. In the dead of night, as the city of Gondolin lay dreaming, a storm rose from the mountains. A wind of no mortal breath swept through the streets, and the fountains sang a song they had never sung before. In the great halls of the king, the waters of the sacred basin trembled, and from their depths arose a voice deep as the ocean and mighty as thunder. "Turgon, son of Folin, hear me!" The king stood frozen, his heart pounding like the beating of waves against the shore. The water shimmered, rippling with light, and in its depths he saw the face of Ulmo, crowned with seaweed and foam, his beard flowing like rivers that had no end. "The hour of secrecy draws to its end," the voice of the Vala warned. "Morgoth's eyes will turn upon you, and the walls you have built will not stand against the wrath that will come. You must prepare." Turgon's breath caught in his throat. "Prepare for what, Lord of the Waters?" Ulmo's gaze, filled with the sorrow of ages, bore into him. "For the fall." A silence heavier than stone settled in the chamber. The king clenched his hands into fists. "Then tell me how to fight, how to keep my people safe." Ulmo's voice was like the tide, unyielding. "There is no safety in hidden walls. You must send forth a messenger into the world beyond, one who will find hope where none can see it, one who will seek the path that even the elves have forgotten." Turgon hesitated, for the thought of opening Gondol into the world filled him with dread. But deep in his heart he knew the truth. No refuge could remain hidden forever. Yet he did not know that the answer to Ulmo's command had already begun. For in the lands of the Edan, the noble race of men, there was one whom fate had already chosen. Tuor, son of H, who would carry the words of the sea into the heart of the mountains. Far across Middle-earth, in the wild lands where rivers ran swift and the sky stretched without end, Tuor sat by the shore of a lonely lake. The fire before him crackled softly, its embers paint pain in his face with shifting gold. He was alone, as he had been for many years, wandering like a shadow upon the land, never finding rest. His people, the house of Hador, had been broken in the wars against Morgoth. Their lands were taken, their strength sundered. And Tuor, though born in nobility, had been raised in the wilderness, hidden from the wrath of the enemy. Yet even in his solitude, something called to him. The waves of the lake whispered as they lapped upon the shore, and in their murmur he heard words. Words not spoken by men or elves, but by the voice of water itself. He could not understand them, not yet, but they wove through his thoughts like threads of silver, guiding him where he knew not. One evening, as the sun bled red upon the horizon, Tuor rose to his feet, driven by a force he could not name. The wind curled around him, pulling at his cloak, and he turned northward where the rivers led. He did not know what awaited him beyond the hills, nor did he understand the dream that filled his heart, but his feet carried him forward as if the very earth had been waiting for this moment. And somewhere beyond the mountains, in the hidden city of Gondolin, a shadow lengthened upon the stones, unseen and silent. The fate of an age had begun its turning. The wind that drifted over the encircling mountains was slow and sorrowful, thick with the scent of unseen waters. Far beyond the stone peaks, it curled around the jagged spires of Gondolin like a breath from forgotten ages, slipping through the silver-lined streets, winding its way past the white towers that rose toward the heavens, only to be swallowed once more by the endless sky. The city shimmered in the light of the stars, and yet beneath its beauty lay a quiet, unseen tension, like the taut string of a harp waiting to be plucked. Turgon stood alone in his high chamber, where the ceiling was fashioned from pale alabaster, veined with strands of gold that caught the faint candlelight. His hands rested upon the marble edge of the great window, his fingers curling against the cold stone, as if he could grasp some fleeting truth hidden beyond the horizon. Below, the fountains murmured their songs of ages past, their voices mingling with the rustling of the trees. But the music did not reach his heart tonight. There was a heaviness upon him, an echo of words spoken in voices older than the world itself. Ulmo's warning had settled deep into the marrow of his bones, a whisper that did not fade with waking. The Lord of Waters had not appeared in the great splendor of the Ior, nor had his voice thundered like the breaking of waves upon a shore. No, his presence had been like the deep current beneath still waters, unseen yet inescapable, a force that pulled the soul downward into contemplation. He had spoken of the fall of Gondolin as one speaks of the setting of the sun, inevitable, unyielding, and yet Turgon could not accept it. Slowly he exhaled, the breath leaving him in a cloud of mist against the cold air. His gaze swept across the rooftops of his city, where the lamps still burned in the halls of the great houses. The swallow, the tree, the golden flower. He thought of the people who lived there, those who had come with him across the wild lands, who would abandon the kingdoms of their forebears for the promise of safety behind these walls. He had given them hope when all else was lost, had sworn to them that Gondolin would stand eternal beyond the reach of shadow. And now Ulmo told him that all of it would crumble into ruin. The sound of quiet steps upon the polished floor stirred him from his thoughts. Turning, he saw Idril, his daughter, standing at the threshold, her golden hair catching the candlelight in soft waves, her silver robes whispering as she moved. There was something in her eyes that troubled him, something that had been there ever since Ulmo's words had been spoken, as if she too had felt the weight of prophecy settle upon their house. "You have not slept," she said softly, her voice like the last echo of a song fading upon the wind. "No," Turgon admitted, straightening. "There is little sleep left for me in these days." He studied her face, the pale curve of her cheek, the steady light in her eyes. "Do you come to soothe your father's doubts, or to add to them?" Idril stepped forward, drawing closer, her hands clasped before her. "I come only to speak what is already in your heart," she said, "and in mine. There is something in this city that does not rest easy. Have you not felt it? As if the walls themselves know they are doomed, as if the very stones we walk upon tremble in their silence." Turgon turned back to the window, his gaze fixed upon the distant mountains where the stars lay scattered like shards of shattered glass. "It is not the walls that tremble," he said at last. "It is we who tremble, knowing what is to come, yet refusing to name it aloud." Idril hesitated, then moved to stand beside him, her voice quieter now, as if speaking into the night itself. "You built this city as a refuge," she murmured, "as a hope against the darkness. And yet you know as well as I do that no refuge lasts forever. The world moves beyond our walls, though we try to pretend otherwise, and those who seek to hide from fate only find themselves unprepared when it comes for them." Perron's fingers tightened against the stone. "Then what would you have me do?" he asked, and for the first time there was something like weariness in his voice, something rare and human beneath the weight of his crown. "Shall I throw open the gates and invite the world inside? Shall I tear down the walls with my own hands so that Gondolin may fall by my doing rather than the enemy's?" "No," Idril whispered, shaking her head. "But you must not close your eyes to what is coming." A silence stretched between them, long and heavy. The wind from the mountains stirred the banners outside, causing them to ripple like waves upon a restless sea. Below, the torches burned low, their golden light flickering against the white stone. It was a city untouched by war, yet already its doom lay written in the stars above. At last Turgon sighed, and when he spoke again his voice was softer, though no less burdened. "There is one who comes," he said, and his eyes lingered on the distant path that led beyond the mountains. "One whom Ulmo has chosen. I do not know his name, nor do I know the path he walks, but the Vala has set him upon it. And if it is his fate to find Gondolin, then perhaps his coming will bring the answer we seek." Idril studied him for a long moment, as if searching for something in his face, some trace of certainty or hope. At last she nodded, though her expression remained troubled. "Then let us hope," she said, "that he does not arrive too late." And far beyond the mountains, upon the shores of a silent lake, two oars stood beneath the starlit sky, feeling the pull of an unseen tide. The wind whispered in his ear, carrying with it the faintest trace of a voice deep and powerful as the ocean's depths. He did not yet understand its words, but they called to him, drawing him forward, guiding his steps upon a path he had not chosen, yet could not turn from. The rivers would lead him onward, the mountains would rise to meet him, and in the hidden city of the elves, a fate long foretold would begin to unfold. For the fall of Gondolin was written in the bones of the world, and even the stars could not change its course. The night was vast, a great tapestry woven of silken shadow and pale silver light. The heavens stretched unbroken above Middle-earth, a dome of quiet constellations that had watched the world since the dawn of time, their radiance reflected in the still waters below. A hush lay upon the land, broken only by the whisper of the wind upon the surface of the lake, where reeds bent in slow oasin to the unseen breath of the world. It was here, at the edge of the waters, that Tuor stood, his cloak wrapped tightly about him against the encroaching chill, his eyes tracing the dark horizon where the mountains loomed like slumbering titans. He had wandered long, and though his path had led him to this place, he knew not why. Something deep within him stirred, a feeling he could not name, an invisible threat pulling him forward, guiding him toward an unknown fate. The land around him lay empty, untouched by war, yet not at peace. The trees stood silent and watchful, their limbs swaying in the night breeze like the slow gestures of ancient, knowing hands. The scent of damp earth and moss rose from the ground, mingling with the faint salt of distant waters that had traveled leagues unseen. There was a feeling here, a presence not of men nor of elves, but something older, deeper, like the pulse of the earth itself beating beneath his feet. Tuor inhaled slowly, letting the stillness settle upon him, though his thoughts swirled like the unseen current beneath the lake's glassy surface. He had spent years wandering, a shadow upon the roads of Middle-earth, living upon what the land would give and what his own hands could take. He had known hunger, cold, and the cruel laughter of the enemy's servants who scoured the land for remnants of the Adon. He had learned to move without sound, to listen to the murmurs of the wind and the distant calls of the birds, reading their language as one reads the shifting clouds before a storm. But this calling was something else entirely. It was neither hunger, nor fear, nor survival that pressed upon him now. It was the voice of something vast and unfathomable, something that spoke not in words, but in the quiet insistence of fate. And then the wind changed. It was sudden, though not violent, like the shifting of a great tide. The air grew heavier, as though the weight of unseen waters had been laid upon it, and the scent of the sea filled his lungs, though no ocean lay within 100 leagues of this place. The reeds swayed, whispering against one another, and in that hush the voice came. It was not loud, nor was it like the speech of men. It was deep, endless, a resonance that seemed to rise not from the air, but from the marrow of the world itself. Tuor, son of Huor, long have you wandered. Long have I watched your steps, guided them through shadow and across the empty wilds. The hour has come. The path is set before you. Tuor did not move. He did not dare to breathe. The voice was not a sound, nor was it within him. It was all around, within the ripples upon the water, the shifting wind, the very stones beneath his feet. And he knew, though he did not understand how, that it was Ulmo, the Lord of Waters, who spoke. You are called to a task that will shape the fate of many. You will walk the road unseen through lands that no mortal has trod unbidden. And in the end, you will stand before a king who must hear my words. Turgon, son of Finolin, dwells in his hidden stronghold, and though he believes himself beyond the reach of the world, his doom draws near. Gondolin is not beyond the sight of the enemy. You must go to him, Tuor. You must bear my warning. A silence followed, stretching out between the water and the land, heavy with the weight of that command. Tu swallowed, his throat dry as if he had walked a desert rather than stood upon the shore. A part of him, the part that had known hardship and exile, that had lived by the sword and the hunt, wished to question, to ask, why him? Why this road? But another part, deeper, older, understood that there was no question to be asked. The words had been spoken. The path was laid. Slowly he stepped forward, the water lapping at the shore as if to meet him. "Lord of the waters," he murmured, his voice hoarse in the vast quiet. "I do not know this road. I do not know if my feet are worthy to tread it. But if it is your will that I should go, then I will go. I have no home to turn to, no kin to follow. If this is the purpose you have set for me, I will see it done." The air stirred again, the presence shifting, receding like a great tide pulling back into the depths. Yet before it was gone entirely, the voice returned, softer now, but no less vast. "Follow the river, the way will be shown." And then all was still. Tu stood for a long time in the silence that followed, his heart throbbing slow and heavy against his ribs. The lake was unchanged, the trees moved. It might have been a dream were it not for the lingering weight of the words upon his soul. At last he exhaled, turning his gaze northward, where the river ran like a silver thread through the land. And without another word he stepped forward, leaving behind the lake, the quiet shore, and the life he had known. The journey would be long, the road would be perilous, but Tuor did not look back. Far away, in the heart of the mountains where the spires of Gondolin rose untouched against the sky, Idril sat alone beneath the boughs of a flowering tree, her fingers resting lightly upon the carved arm of the bench. The air was cool, carrying the faintest scent of night-blooming jasmine, and above, the sky stretched dark and clear, unmarred by cloud or storm. Yet her thoughts were not of beauty, nor even of the peace that had cradled this city for so many years. She felt it still, that whisper in the marrow of her bones, the feeling that something unseen had begun to stir. Her father had spoken of Ulmo's warning, and she had listened, though her heart had already known what he would say before he had spoken the words. She did not know how she knew, only that she did, that the city was not safe, that the enemy's eye would turn toward them, that time which had seemed endless within these walls was at last running short. And yet, as she sat beneath the trees, she did not feel fear. No, it was something else, something quieter, deeper, a waiting. She closed her eyes, listening to the night, to the murmur of the fountains, to the rustling of the wind through the high towers. Somewhere beyond these walls, the one who was meant to come had already begun his journey. The waters would guide him, the stars would watch over him, and soon he would stand before her father, bringing with him the tide that could not be turned back. And Idril, who had always listened to the silence of things unspoken, would be there to meet him. The river's song was ancient, a slow and steady murmur that wove through the land like a voice from another age. It had carved its path through the stone long before men or elves had walked these lands, its waters knowing nothing of time or fate. Now it ran like a silver road beneath the moon, its surface rippling as the wind played upon it, carrying whispers from the unseen depths. Tuor moved along its banks, his steps slow and deliberate, his boots pressing into the damp earth with a quiet rhythm. He did not know where the path would lead him, only that it was not his to choose. The voice of Ulmo still lingered in his mind, not as a memory, but as a presence that had taken root within him, silent yet unshakable. The words of the Lord of Waters had settled deep into his bones, into the very breath that left his lips. He felt as though he had stepped beyond the world he had known into something older, something shaped not by chance, but by the slow, inexorable hand of fate. The night air was thick with the scent of rain, though no storm had yet come. The trees that lined the river bent toward the water, their leaves whispering in low, hushed voices, as if sharing secrets with the current. The ground was uneven, strewn with stones polished smooth by time, and beneath his feet the damp moss clung to the rocks like remnants of forgotten dreams. There was a stillness here that did not feel empty but watchful, as if the land itself was waiting. Tuor's fingers brushed against the rough bark of a tree as he passed, feeling the ridges beneath his touch, grounding himself in something solid. He had been alone for so long that silence had become his only companion. Yet this silence was different. It was not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of something unseen, something present yet hidden, guiding him forward. He had walked for hours before he finally spoke, his voice quiet, almost hesitant, as if uncertain whether the air itself would carry his words. "Is this what it means to be chosen?" he murmured, his breath visible in the cool night air. "To step forward without knowing the road ahead? I do not fear the path, but I do not understand it. And yet I go." The wind stirred, lifting his cloak, brushing against his skin like a fleeting touch, and for a moment he imagined that it was an answer, though it carried no words. He thought of his father, Tuor, who had stood upon the battlefield at unnumbered tiers, and had not turned back though he had known his doom. Had he felt this same weight upon his shoulders, this same pull toward something unknown? Or had he stood with certainty unshaken, knowing that his end was written in the stars? Tuor wished he could have asked him, but his father's voice had long been silenced by the passage of time. A memory stirred within him unbidden. The voice of Anna Nale, the elf who had raised him, speaking in the quiet of the night, his words soft but firm. "The world moves as the sea moves, Tuor. It does not halt for any one man's sorrow or longing. You may stand on the shore and lament that the tide does not obey your will, or you may step forward and let it carry you where it must." Tuor's hands clenched at his sides. He had not understood those words when he was younger, but now, as he stood upon the banks of the river with nothing ahead but the unknown, he understood them well enough. The tide had come for him, though it was not the sea, but something far greater, something older than the mountains themselves. He could no more turn back than a wave could refuse to break upon the shore. Ahead the river curved, disappearing into the dense woodland where the trees grew tall and close, their branches intertwining to form a vaulted ceiling of green and gold. The moonlight barely reached through the canopy, leaving the path ahead in shifting shadows. Tuor hesitated at the edge of the trees, for he could not see beyond them, only feel the press of the darkness within. It was not an unnatural darkness. There was no malice in it, no lurking eyes or unseen threats. But it was a veil, a place that had not been touched by the sun for many years. He took a breath and stepped forward, the cool shade wrapping around him like the closing of a door. The sounds of the night changed within the forest. The river still whispered, but its voice was muted, distant. The rustling of leaves became more pronounced, the creak of the branches overhead like the slow turning of old thoughts. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood, of rich soil and fallen leaves that had long since surrendered to the earth. Tuor moved carefully, his steps quieter now, though the forest did not feel hostile. It was ancient, yes, but it was not his enemy. It was only a place where time did not move as it did in the open world. A sudden rustle in the undergrowth made him halt. He turned sharply, his hand instinctively reaching for the hilt of his blade. The silence that followed was thick, pressing. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged, a tall form cloaked in gray, the hood drawn low over their face. Tuor tensed, but something in the figure's bearing made him hesitate before drawing steel. The stranger moved slowly, deliberately, as though they had been waiting. "You have come far." The voice was deep, smooth, yet edged with something that was neither kindness nor threat, only certainty. "And you will go farther still." Tuor studied the figure, his grip firm upon his blade but not yet drawn. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice calm, though his pulse quickened. "Are you one of the Eldar?" The figure inclined their head slightly, as if acknowledging a truth that needed no confirmation. "I am Voronwë," they said at last. And though the name meant nothing to Tuor, the weight with which it was spoken told him enough. "And I have been sent to find you." A pause stretched between them, filled only by the distant sound of the river. Tuor felt the shape of fate settling around him like an unseen hand upon his shoulder, pressing him forward. He did not know this man, did not know what lay ahead, but he knew beyond any doubt that he was meant to follow. Voronwë turned, his cloak shifting like the wings of a bird in flight. "Come," he said. "There is much you must see before the end." Tuor hesitated only for a breath, then stepped forward, leaving the river behind, stepping deeper into the forest, deeper into the unknown. And far away in the hidden city of Gondolin, Idril woke from a dream she could not remember, her heart quickened by something unseen. She rose from her bed and moved to the balcony, looking out over the silver-lit towers, feeling the weight of the night pressing down upon the city. There was something in the air, a feeling she could not name, but one that she could not ignore. A wind stirred the banners upon the high walls, and Idril shivered, though the air was not cold. Somewhere beyond the mountains, the tide had begun to turn. Somewhere beyond the gates, the world was shifting. And though she could not yet see it, though she did not yet know his name, the man who would change all things had begun his journey toward them. The silence of Gondolin held steady, but Idril knew that the silence would not last forever. The path wound through the heart of the ancient forest, where the trees stood like silent sentinels, their trunks thick with moss and thyme, their canopies so dense that only the faintest shafts of moonlight pierced through. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and pine, a fragrance that lingered like the memory of rain long since fallen. The world here seemed suspended, caught between waking and dreaming, as though time moved slower beneath the vaulted branches, whispering in a language too old for men to understand. Tuor walked beside Vonu, the silence between them not of unease, but of expectation, as if the very air trembled with the weight of unspoken truths. For a long while they said nothing, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of fallen leaves, their breath forming faint ghosts in the cold night air. Tuor had long since ceased questioning the strangeness of his path, yet as he glanced toward the elf beside him, he felt the stirrings of curiosity, the need to understand the one who had come to guide him into the unknown. Voronwë moved with the quiet grace of the Eldar, his steps light even upon the uneven ground, and though his face was partially obscured by the shadows of his hood, there was something in his bearing that spoke of distant sorrow, a weight carried not in the body, but in the soul. At last, Tu broke the silence, his voice low, almost reverent, as though he feared disturbing the hush of the forest. "You said you were sent to find me. By whom, and for what purpose? I do not believe in chance, not anymore." He paused, letting the rhythm of the forest settle around them like a great breathing thing. "It was Ulmo who spoke to me, who bade me follow this river. And now you are here, as if you had always known where I would be." Voronwë did not answer immediately. He walked a few paces more, his gaze fixed upon the winding path ahead, before he finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of long contemplation. "The world does not move by chance, Tuor, nor do the paths of fate tangle without design. That you were called was no accident, nor was my finding of you. I am Verin, son of Erenwë, of the house of Finalen, and I have seen the deep places of the world, where the bones of the earth groan beneath the weight of time. I have walked roads that no mortal has walked, sailed upon waters that do not reflect the sky, and I have returned from the edge of the world, only to bear one message, that Gondolin cannot remain hidden forever." Tuor listened, absorbing each word as one who drinks from a well after long thirst. "Gondolin," he repeated, tasting the name upon his tongue as if it were the key to a door long closed. "I have heard whispers of it in old songs, in the voices of those who speak only in the tongue of dreams. A city beyond sight, hidden from shadow, where the last hope of the Eldar remains unbroken. But if it is beyond the reach of the enemy, why does Ulmo send me to it? Why does he say that its doom approaches?" Voronwë let out a slow breath, as though he had long pondered the same question and found no comfort in the answer. "Because no wall, no mountain, no secret road is beyond the reach of fate. The Valor may have turned from Middle-earth, but Ulmo alone still watches, still speaks, though the winds carry his voice only to those who will listen. I was among those chosen to seek his will, to sail the great sea and plead for the mercy of the West. But the waves rejected me. The storms cast me back upon these shores, and I was given another task, to wait, to watch, to find the one who would carry Ulmo's words where mine could not." The path narrowed, and the trees grew closer, their gnarled limbs reaching toward them as if straining to touch the figures that passed beneath them. Tuor ran a hand along the rough bark of a nearby trunk, feeling the age beneath his fingertips, the slow passage of centuries woven into the very grain of the wood. The trees of this forest had stood long before his time and would likely remain long after he was gone. And yet even they were not beyond the reach of fate. "You speak of fate as though it were a thing as certain as the sunrise," Tuor said, his voice quieter now, contemplative. "As though we do not shape our own steps, but merely follow a path that was set for us long before we drew breath. If that is so, then what are we but echoes of choices made by those who came before us? What purpose does it serve for me to walk this road if its end has already been written?" Voronwë turned his gaze upon Tuor, and though the light was faint, his eyes gleamed with something ancient, something solemn. "It is not the end that is written, son of H, only the road. And even the road bends, though it leads ever onward." The wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of water, the distant murmur of a hidden stream breaking the quiet of the trees. Tuor let the words settle within him, feeling their weight, their truth. He did not know what awaited him beyond the mountains, nor what words he would find when he stood before the king of Gondolin. But he knew, as surely as he knew the beat of his own heart, that the tide had turned, that the unseen current was pulling him forward, and that he could no more resist it than he could command the river to halt its course. For a time they walked in silence once more, each lost in thought, the whispering trees their only company. The stars wheeled above them, cold and distant, and Tuor felt small beneath their gaze, as though he were but a fleeting ember in the vast forge of the world. And yet he did not feel alone. The weight of Ulmo's voice remained with him, as real as the earth beneath his feet, as certain as the path that stretched ahead. At last Fanwë spoke again, his voice softer now, as if speaking to the night itself. "There is a saying among my people, one that has been carried through ages long before even the first rising of the moon. No road is walked in solitude, though the traveler's feet may seem alone upon it." He glanced to Tuor then, a ghost of a smile in his expression, though it was tinged with something else, something almost like sorrow. "You are not the first to question the weight of fate, nor will you be the last. But know this, Tuor of the Edene, though your steps are your own, they are part of a song that began long before you and will echo long after." Tuor nodded, the words finding a home within him, though he did not yet fully understand them. He exhaled, watching as his breath curled in the night air like the last whisper of a dying fire. "Then let the road be walked," he murmured, his voice steady, his heart resolved. And so they pressed on, deeper into the ancient wood, toward the hidden path that would lead them through the mountains, toward the city that waited beyond the reach of sight. The night stretched onward, and in the far distance, beyond stone and shadow, Gondolin dreamed beneath the stars, unaware that the tide had begun to rise. The road that stretched before them was no longer merely a path through the woods, no longer a simple passage between trees that whispered secrets of ages past. As Tuor and Varen pressed deeper into the wild lands, the forest began to change. The air thickened, filled with the scent of damp earth and pine resin, the mingling aroma of fresh rain and old sun-warmed wood. The ground, once soft with leaf fall, grew firmer beneath their feet, turning to dark, slick stone that glistened in the pale light of the unseen moon. The trees grew denser, their ancient roots curling over rocks like the fingers of forgotten giants, their gnarled limbs stretching overhead in twisting arches, casting deep shadows even in the quiet glow of starlight. The silence was different now. No longer the stillness of peace, but something else, something expectant, something watchful. Tuor could feel it pressing against him, not with the weight of threat, but with the weight of knowledge unspoken. It was as if the land itself bore witness to the path he walked, as if the mountains beyond had already judged his coming and found him wanting, yet let him pass all the same. He exhaled, watching as his breath curled in the air, vanishing like the last remnants of a forgotten dream. He had lived many years in solitude, long enough to know the difference between the quiet of the world and the quiet that comes when something waits just beyond the edge of sight. It was Voronwë who finally spoke, his voice low as if unwilling to disturb the hush that lay upon them. "This forest remembers things long buried," he said, running his fingers lightly along the bark of a nearby tree, tracing its ancient ridges as if reading a script too old for words. "It has seen the coming and passing of many, but few of your kind have walked this way. The Edain do not tread lightly upon these lands. The trees listen, and though they do not speak as the elves do, they remember." Tuor glanced at him, studying his face in the dim glow of the starlit canopy. "Then let them remember me," he murmured. "For I am not my father, nor my father's father. I am the last of a house long hunted, long scattered to the winds. I have walked through lands where no voice but my own has spoken, and I have listened to the silence as one listens to the coming of a storm. If the trees know more of my fifth than I do, let them tell it to me plainly." Voronwë turned to him then, his gaze sharp, though not unkind. "Fate is not spoken in words," he said, "but in the way the river bends, in the way the wind shifts before the rain. You say you have walked in silence, but did you listen? Truly listen? Not all that is quiet is empty, Tuor, nor is all that is unseen without purpose. You are sent upon this path not because you sought it, but because it has awaited you. Do you think the Lord of Waters chose you without cause? Do you think the stars have turned their gaze upon you for nothing?" Tuor frowned, feeling the weight of the words settle upon him like the tightening of a chain he had never seen, but always felt. He had long ceased to question the will of the Valor, for he knew it was not his to understand. And yet the thought that his steps had been watched, that his breath had been counted, that the course of his life had not been his own to choose, it unsettled him in a way that even the long, empty years of wandering had not. "Ah, I do not fear the path," he said at last. "But neither do I wish to be a tool wielded by hands I cannot see. If I am to carry this message, let it be because I will it, not because I was shaped for it like a blade upon a forge." We studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he nodded. "That is well," he said, his voice quieter now, almost reverent. "For even a blade, though forged by another's hand, must choose where it strikes." The wind stirred then, rushing through the trees with a sigh that seemed almost like speech, and two shivered, though the air was not cold. They walked on, the night pressing close around them, the hush deepening as the path narrowed, winding toward the base of the mountains that loomed ever nearer, their jagged peaks like the broken teeth of the world. The stars flickered, distant and pale, and somewhere in the unseen distance a wolf howled. a long, low cry that did not speak of hunger but of mourning. As they climbed higher, the forest began to thin, the trees growing sparser, their twisted roots gripping the rocky ground like the hands of the dead. The air grew thinner, sharper, each breath a whisper of the coming heights, of the cold that awaited them upon the slopes. The mountains did not welcome them, nor did they reject them. They simply stood silent and unyielding, as they had stood since the breaking of the world. And Tuor knew, as he gazed upon them, that whatever lay beyond, whatever secrets Gondolin held within its hidden walls, it would not be given freely. They camped that night beneath the shadow of the cliffs, where the stones rose in great towering spires, jagged and dark against the sky. The fire they built was small, its flames flickering like the heartbeat of some fragile thing, barely touching the cold that seeped from the stone. Tuor sat with his back against a boulder, his sword across his knees, watching as Voronwë traced patterns in the dust with his fingers, his thoughts as distant as the stars overhead. "Do you miss it?" Tuor asked after a long silence, his voice rough with the weariness of the road. "Your home." Voronwë did not look up, but the movement of his hand stilled, his fingers resting against the earth. "Home," he murmured, as if testing the word upon his tongue. "There was a time when I would have answered, yes, when I would have longed for the halls of my kin, for the sound of voices raised in song beneath the golden trees. But I have seen too much, Tuor. I have walked the shores where the sea meets the sky, and I have looked westward beyond the veil of the world. And I know now that home is not a place, but a thing lost beyond reach." Tuor frowned, turning his gaze to the fire. "Then why do you go back? Why do you return to Gondolin if your heart no longer calls it home?" Voronwë sighed, and when he spoke his voice was heavy, not with sorrow, but with something deep, something worn thin by time and trial. "Because some things are not done for the sake of longing, but for the sake of duty. I was sent to seek a road that could not be found, and in failing, I was given another purpose, to guide you, to bring you to the one who must hear the words you carry. And so I return, not as one who seeks to belong, but as one who fulfills the last debt owed." Tuor was silent for a long moment, his fingers tightening around the hilt of his sword. The fire crackled softly, its embers drifting upward, vanishing into the dark. He did not know if he would ever understand the weight that the Alar carried, the long years stretched behind them like an endless road filled with the echoes of voices long silenced. But he understood this. The road before them did not wait. It moved even now beyond sight, drawing them forward toward whatever fate had woven into its course. At last he closed his eyes, letting the weariness take him. The wind whispered through the pass, and far beyond the mountains, beneath the stars that watched without judgment, Gondolin stood waiting. The mountains loomed above them like the bones of the earth laid bare to the sky, their peaks dusted with the cold kiss of time, their jagged ridges carved by the slow and patient hand of the wind. The path that wound through them was no road, but a whisper of a trail, a treacherous passage where stone crumbled beneath the feet, and the silence pressed in from all sides like an unspoken warning. The air was thin, sharp as a blade, carrying the scent of frost and distant storms, and every breath Tuor took seemed to draw not just the cold into his lungs, but the weight of the path ahead. He walked with his head bowed against the wind, his cloak snapping behind him like the tattered wing of a bird caught in the gale. And though his limbs ached with the long journey, he did not falter. The road had become part of him now, each step another stitch in the unseen tapestry that had been woven long before his birth. Voronwë moved beside him, silent as shadow, his keen elven eyes reading the land with an understanding Tuor could not yet grasp. There was a tension in his movements, a quiet weariness that had nothing to do with the hardship of the climb, and everything to do with what lay ahead. The mountains of Eoria had long stood as the silent guardians of Gondolin, their sheer cliffs and hidden paths shielding the city from the eyes of the enemy. But secrecy was a fragile thing, easily unraveled by time and the shifting of fate. Even now, as they climbed through the high bypasses where no armies had tread, Tuor could feel the weight of unseen eyes, the cold breath of something distant, yet drawing nearer. He did not know if it was only the will of the valor that had set him upon this path, or if the enemy too had begun to take notice of his journey. The thought coiled in the back of his mind like a serpent, restless and waiting. At last, as the sun began to slip toward the western horizon, they reached a narrow ledge where the wind howled through the gaps in the stone like a mourning voice. And before them the mountains parted, revealing a valley veiled in shadow and mist. Tuor halted, his breath catching in his throat as his gaze swept over the sight before him. The Encircling Mountains formed an unbroken wall around the hidden land, their peaks reaching toward the heavens as though straining to hold back the sky itself. And there, cradled within their embrace, lay Gondolin, the white city, the dream of Turgon made stone and light. Even from this distance, Tuor could see the gleam of its towers, the faint shimmer of the river Sirion as it wove through the valley like a silver thread. The city seemed unreal, a vision drawn from some forgotten song, and yet he knew that it was no dream. It was waiting. For a long time he stood in silence, his heart beating slow and heavy as the weight of all that had come before settled upon him. He had wandered for years without purpose, his steps leading him through lands where no voices called his name, through battles fought in shadow and silence, through the hollow echo of a world that had already forgotten his people. But now, for the first time, he understood why he had been led here, why the road had refused to release him. He was meant to be here. He was meant to stand before the gates of Gondolin, to speak the words Ulmo had placed upon his lips, to carry the tide of fate into the heart of a city that believed itself safe. And yet, as he stood upon the threshold of destiny, he felt not triumph, but sorrow. For he knew, as surely as he knew the coming of the dawn, that nothing remained untouched by time. Even the most hidden of cities could not escape the turning of the world. Voronwë spoke then, his voice quiet though it carried through the wind like the last note of a fading song. "This is what you have sought," he said, though there was no joy in his tone. "And yet, even as you look upon it, you know that it will not remain as it is. You feel it, do you not? The way the air trembles, the way the stone beneath our feet holds its breath. Gondolin stands, and yet its fate is already woven into the shadow of the world." Tuor turned to him, his eyes dark with thought. "Then why bring me here?" he asked. "Why does Ulmo send me to a city already bound to its doom? If the walls will fall, if the rivers will run red, then what purpose do I serve? Am I only to witness its passing, to stand among the ruins and know that I have come too late?" Baranu studied him for a long moment, his gaze measuring, as though weighing the depth of Tuor's soul against the burden he carried. "No," he said at last, and there was something in his voice, something distant and knowing. "Not all that falls is lost. Not all that ends is without purpose. The fate of Gondolin is not yours to change, nor was it ever. But there are things that must be done before the end, words that must be spoken, choices that must be made. You are not here to save the city, Tuor. You are here to bear its hope when the fire comes." Tuor did not answer at first. He turned his gaze back to the valley, to the city that gleamed like a pearl hidden within the shell of the mountains. He thought of his father, of the stories he had been told as a child, of the great battles that had been fought in the name of freedom, of the blood that had been spilled for a future that had never come to pass. He thought of Ulmo's voice, deep as the ocean and endless as the tide, speaking of a fate he could not yet see. And he thought of the stars, of the way they shone above all things, distant and cold, watching as the world turned beneath them. He let out a slow breath, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "Then let me see it with my own eyes," he said, his voice steady though the weight of his words settled deep into his bones. "Let me walk the streets of the city that will fall. Let me speak to the king who believes himself beyond the reach of the world. If I am to bear its hope, then let me first know what it is I carry." Bouet nodded once, a solemn gesture, and without another word he turned toward the path that wound downward toward the valley where Gondolin stood waiting. Tuor followed, his steps slow, deliberate, as if each one was carving his name into the stone beneath his feet. The wind howled, the sky darkened, and far above, unseen beyond the mountains, the shadow of Morgoth stirred, the tide of doom rising unseen beneath the surface of the world. And Gondolin, the hidden city, stood beneath the stars, dreaming of eternity, unaware that the dream was drawing to an end. The way down into the valley was steep, a path carved by time and the quiet footsteps of those few who had ever walked this way. The rocks, sharp and slick with the damp breath of the high places, jutted out in uneven shapes as if the very bones of the mountains had twisted in protest against the path they now walked. Tuor could feel the weight of the land pressing down upon them, the silence stretching between the jagged ridges like an unspoken warning. The air grew heavier as they descended, thick with the scent of rain long past, and the distant memory of water that had once flowed freely but had since been swallowed by the stone. The valley below was swathed in mist, its gray fingers curling around the edges of the cliffs, rising like breath from the earth itself. The city lay hidden within it, the walls and towers shrouded in a veil that seemed less of nature and more of enchantment, as though the land itself conspired to keep Gondolin a secret, even from the stars. And yet through the shifting haze, Tuor caught glimpses of white stone glistening in the last light of the dying sun, spires reaching toward the heavens like the frozen flames of a silent fire. The river Sirion, silver in the fading glow, wound its way through the valley, its voice hushed but ceaseless, murmuring to the stones that lined its banks, as though whispering the tales of all who had passed through these hidden lands. Bonwë walked ahead of him, his steps measured, his gaze unreadable as he led the way toward the secret entrance of Gondolin. His silence had deepened since they had first glimpsed the city, as if the weight of returning pressed upon him more heavily than the burden of the long road behind them. Tuor could see it in the way his shoulders tensed, in the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, as though he were wrestling with a thought he dared not speak aloud. At last, as they neared the base of the cliffs, where the entrance lay hidden behind a wall of cascading water, Vaughn halted. His voice low, almost reluctant, as though each word cost him something to utter. "Before we enter, there is something you must understand," he said, turning to face Tuor fully, his gray eyes shadowed with thought. "Gondolin is not merely a city. It is a dream made stone, a place born of exile and longing, built by those who sought to create a refuge beyond the reach of the world. It has stood for centuries, untouched by war, unseen by the enemy, a sanctuary where time has been allowed to drift like the slow turning of the stars. But it is also a prison. Though few who dwell within its walls would name it so, the people of Gondolin do not believe they are exiles. They believe they are the last free folk of this world, that beyond their gates there is only ruin and shadow. They do not see that the very mountains that guard them are also the walls that bind them, and they will not easily welcome a stranger who comes bearing warnings of doom." Tuor studied him, taking in the weight behind his words, the slow sorrow that had settled into his voice. "You speak as though you do not belong to them," he said, his tone careful, measured, "as though you have walked their streets, sung their songs, and yet have never truly called it home." For Ennui's gaze flickered, something shifting behind his eyes like the movement of deep water beneath the surface of a still lake. "Because I have seen beyond the mountains," he murmured, his voice quieter now, almost wistful. "I have stood upon the shores where the waves whisper of lands that no elf may return to, and I have sailed upon waters that stretch beyond the sight of the sun. And in that vastness, in that endless expanse of sea and sky, I have felt what it is to be free. Gondolin is beautiful, but it is not free. It is a jewel hidden in the darkness. But jewels are hoarded, locked away, kept safe until the hand that holds them is broken, and they are lost forever." Tuor did not answer at once. He looked toward the mist, toward the city that lay beyond it, and for a moment he tried to imagine what it would be like to live in such a place, to walk streets untouched by war, to dwell in halls where no cries of battle had ever echoed. But even as he let the thought settle upon him, he felt the unease stir in his heart, the knowledge that such stillness could not last, that no place, no matter how well hidden, could remain untouched forever. "Then why do you return?" he asked finally. "If you have seen the open sea, if you have tasted freedom, why do you come back to a city that will not listen to what you have learned?" For Ennuy exhaled a long, quiet breath that seemed to carry the weight of years upon it. "Because not all journeys are for ourselves," he said, and there was something resolute in his voice now, something unshaken. "I return because I was given a task, and though my heart may long for the road, my duty calls me here. The tides do not ask where they must go, nor do the winds refuse their course. We are all carried forward, whether we will it or not." Tuor nodded slowly, understanding in his own way the truth of those words. He had not chosen this road, but neither had he turned from it. It had found him, drawn him forward like the pull of the river to the sea, and now as he stood upon the threshold of Gondolin, he knew that there was no turning back. "Then let us go," he said, his voice steady, though his heart was not. "Let us walk through the gates of the city that does not know its doom." Voronwë gave a small nod, and without another word, he turned and led Tuor toward the waterfall that concealed the hidden entrance. The roar of the water grew louder as they approached, filling the air with its ceaseless song. And when they stepped through the veil of mist, the path beyond opened before them. A tunnel of stone, smooth and worn, stretching into the darkness like the throat of some great, silent beast. Torches flickered along the walls, their flames barely reaching the high, arched ceiling, casting long, wavering shadows that seemed to dance with each step they took. The air was cool here, carrying the scent of damp stone and the faint trace of something older, something that lay beyond sight, but not beyond knowing. As they moved deeper into the passage, Tuor felt the shift in the air, the presence of unseen eyes watching from the darkness. He knew, even before the sound of steel scraping against stone reached his ears, that they were no longer alone. And then from the shadows figures emerged, tall, clad in armor of silver and blue, their faces hidden behind helms wrought in the likeness of eagles, their spears gleaming in the dim light. They moved with the quiet precision of those who had stood watch for years uncounted. And when they spoke, their voices were calm, but edged with warning. "Halt!" one of them commanded, stepping forward, his grip firm upon his spear. "No man passes these gates unbidden. Speak your name and your purpose, or turn back into the wilds." Tuor met the gaze behind the helm, his own voice steady as he answered. "I am Tuor, son of Huor of the House of Hador, and I come at the bidding of Ulmo, Lord of the Waters. I bring a message to Turgon, King of Gondolin, and I will not turn back." A silence followed, heavy and unbroken, as the guards studied him, as the weight of his words settled into the stone itself. And then, without another word, one of them turned and signaled for the gate to be opened. The way to Gondolin stood before him now, and the doom of the city had begun. The air inside the hidden passage was cool and still, carrying the scent of damp stone and the faint whisper of flowing water. The torches flickered as Tuor and Varen passed beneath their golden glow, their flames struggling against the draft that wove through the tunnel like the breath of something vast and unseen. The walls, smooth with age and carved with sigils that had not been touched by sunlight in centuries, seemed to lean inward, not in menace but in quiet solemnity, as if they too were keepers of Gondolin's held secret. The path beneath Tuor's feet sloped gently downward, guiding them deeper into the mountain's embrace. And though his heart was steady, there was a weight upon him, a heaviness that did not come from the road alone. They walked in silence for a time, their footsteps echoing in the enclosed space, the sounds swallowed quickly by the pressing dark. Tuor's thoughts churned like the deep currents of the ocean, slow, unseen, but relentless. He had spent years wandering, following no path but the one necessity had forced upon him, never knowing if his steps carried him toward something or only further from what once had been. But now, as the road narrowed, as the walls tightened like the closing fist of fate, he knew that he was at last approaching the heart of the vision Ulmo had placed before him. This was not merely the end of a journey. It was the beginning of something greater than himself, something that had been written into the fabric of the world long before he was ever born. Voronwë walked beside him, his gaze unreadable, his elven grace unbroken even in the dim light. Tuor had begun to understand the weight that Voronwë carried, the quiet sorrow that dwelt in his eyes like a fading ember. He was of Gondolin, yet apart from it. He was returning home, but with no joy in his heart. And Tuor wondered, Was it because he knew what awaited them there? Did he see with the foresight of the Eldar the shadow that loomed unseen upon the city's gleaming towers? At last, Tu broke the silence, his voice low, almost hesitant. "When you left this place," he said, "did you believe you would return? Or had you already made peace with the thought that you might never walk these halls again?" Voronwë did not answer immediately. He walked a few steps more, his hand brushing idly against the smooth stone of the tunnel, as though seeking something in its touch. When he spoke, his voice was measured, yet tinged with something distant, as though he were recalling a memory half buried beneath years of solitude. "When I left, I did not think of return. I thought only of the road ahead, of the sea, and the hope that lay beyond it. We had believed in the days before I sailed that perhaps mercy still lingered in the west, that the valor might look upon us and take pity, that the doom which had been spoken over the Noldor might yet be undone. But the ocean is a cruel keeper of hope, Tuor. I saw the waves rise against us, saw the sky darken until no light remained but the cold glimmer of the stars. And in that vast emptiness I understood there would be no return to Aman. Not for me. Not for any of us." Tuor watched him, saw the faint tightening of his jaw, the flicker of something deep in his gaze, something that had been shaped by loss in the endless passing of years. "And yet you have returned," he said quietly. "Not to the sea, but to the very place you sought to leave behind. For when we exhaled a sound, barely more than a breath." "Yes," he murmured, "because though the sea did not grant me passage, Ulmo did not abandon me. He set me upon a different road, one I did not choose, but one I could not refuse. And now I walk it to its end." Tuor felt those words settle deep within him, for they were the mirror of his own. He too had not chosen this path. He too had been caught in the tide of something greater than himself. And though he did not yet know what lay at the road's end, he knew that he would not turn from it. The tunnel widened then, the passage opening into a vast chamber where the walls of the mountain had been hollowed out into a great cavern, its ceiling arching high above them, veined with glowing crystals that shimmered with the light of unseen torches. Before them, set within the rock itself, stood a great gate of mithril and steel, its surface carved with the sigils of the House of Engulfing, its edges lined with veins of white stone that pulsed faintly, as though the very metal held the memory of the starlight under which it had been forged. A figure stood before the gate, clad in armor that gleamed like the reflection of the moon upon water, his helm roughed in the shape of a soaring eagle, his spear resting lightly in one hand. When he stepped forward, his voice was calm, but edged with the authority of one who had long stood watch over this threshold. "Who comes to the hidden city in a time when no roads lead to its gates?" Voronwë stepped forward, his tone respectful but unwavering. "It is I, Voronwë, son of Aranu, returned from long wandering. And with me is Tuor, son of Huor of the House of Hador. He comes at the bidding of Ulmo, Lord of the Waters, and bears a message for King Turgon." A silence followed, heavy and unbroken, the weight of the words settling into the chamber like the slow shifting of stone. Then, after a long moment, the guard inclined his head. "You will be brought before the king," he said simply, turning to signal to those within. The great gates shuttered, their surface gleaming as they parted, revealing the path beyond. Tuor stepped forward, and as he crossed the threshold, the city of Gondolin unfurled before him, like the turning of a page in a story he had only just begun to read. White towers rose against the sky, their pinnacles gleaming in the golden light of the setting sun, their walls lined with banners that fluttered like rivers of silk in the high mountain wind. Streets paved with pale stone wound through the city, lined with trees whose leaves shimmered like silver in the twilight. Fountains sang softly in the squares, their waters catching the last light of the day, casting reflections that danced upon the walls like fleeting ghosts. And yet, for all its beauty, for all its perfection, Tuor felt the whisper of something beneath the surface, something unseen yet not absent. The city was a dream made stone, but even the most beautiful dreams must one day end. As he walked through the streets, the eyes of the people followed him, their expressions unreadable, their voices hushed as they whispered among themselves. A man had come to the city, a man of the Edine, and with him the breath of something that did not belong in this place of stillness. The river had carried him here, the wind had guided him, and the sea had called his name. And now at last he stood upon the threshold of fate, for the last refuge of the Noor still stood, untouched by war, unseen by the enemy. But the tide had turned, the waters of Ulmo had spoken, and the fall of Gondolin had begun for